Glass explodes. Water crashes. A woman's scream pierces the night as she plunges through Detective Marcus Chen's hot tub cover, thrashing in the bubbling chaos. Blood streams down her face as she gasps his name, but they've never met. In 50 seconds, Marcus will discover the crashed car in his driveway belongs to the hit-and-run driver who killed his daughter 3 years ago. Tonight, Karma has a beefy explosion of glass and metal against Marcus Chen's backyard fence sounded like the world ending. He bolted upright from his kitchen table, coffee mug crashing to the floor, ceramic shards mixing with the scattered case files he'd been reviewing. The motion sensor lights blazed to life, illuminating his backyard like a crime scene. Through the sliding glass door, he saw his hot tub's wooden cover splintered into pieces. Steam rising from the churning water where something desperately. Marcus grabbed his service weapon from the counter and sprinted outside, adrenaline flooding his system. 23 years on the force had taught him to expect anything, but nothing had prepared him for the sight of a woman in a blood-soaked evening dress fighting to stay afloat in his jacuzzi. "Help me," she screamed, her voice raw with panic. "Please, I can't swim." Without hesitation, Marcus holstered his gun and plunged into the hot water, fully clothed. The woman clawed at him desperately, her fingernails raking across his forearms as he wrapped his arms around her torso and hauled her toward the edge. "I've got you," he said, his voice steady despite his racing heart. "Stop fighting me. I'm a cop." She went rigid in his arms, her struggles ceasing so abruptly it was like someone had flipped a switch. In the harsh glare of the security lights, Marcus got his first clear look at her face. Mid-30s, auburn hair plastered to her, skull a deep gash across her forehead painting crimson streaks down her cheek, but it was her eyes that made him pause, wide green, and filled with something that looked suspiciously like recognition. "You're," Chia whispered, water lapping against the tub's edge as they both caught their breath. "You're Marcus Chen." A chill that had nothing to do with the night air ran down Marcus's spine. "How do you know my name?" Before she could answer, the sound of twisted metal groaning drew his attention to the gap in his fence. Through the splintered wood, he could see the front end of a silver sedan wedged against his property line, steam rising from its crumpled hood. The car had clearly been traveling at high speed when it left the road, careened through his neighbor's yard and launched through his fence like a missile. "We need to get you out of here," Marcus said, helping her climb from the tub. "You might have internal injuries." "I'm calling an ambulance." "No." The word came out sharp, desperate. She grabbed his wrist with surprising strength. "No hospitals. No ambulances. Please." Marcus studied her face, his cop instincts screaming that something was very wrong. In 2 decades of police work, he'd learned that people who refused medical attention after car crashes usually had good reasons, and those reasons were rarely legal. "Ma'am, you just crashed through my fence and nearly drowned in my hot tub. You're bleeding, possibly concussed, and I know where I am," she interrupted. "I know exactly where I am." The way she said it made Marcus's blood run cold. He took a step back, his hand instinctively moving toward his weapon. "What's your name?" She stood there dripping, her ruined dress clinging to her frame, looking like some apocalyptic mermaid who'd risen from the depths of his suburban nightmare. For a long moment, she just stared at him, her green eyes reflecting the harsh security lights. "Sarah," she finally said. "Sarah Whitmore." The name hit Marcus like a physical blow. He staggered backward, his heel catching on the tub's edge, nearly sending him tumbling back into the water. The case files scattered across his kitchen table suddenly made perfect sense, the files he'd been reviewing when her car exploded into his life. Sarah Whitmore, the woman who had killed his daughter? "That's impossible," he whispered, his voice barely audible over the sound of the hot tub's circulation system. "You're in prison. You're supposed to be in Millbrook Correctional for another 4 years. Sarah wrapped her arms around herself, shivering despite the warm September night. "I was released 3 days ago. Good behavior." The words felt like acid in Marcus's throat. Good behavior. 3 years. Emma had been dead for 3 years, 4 months, and 18 days. And the woman who had run her down was standing in his backyard, bleeding and beautiful, and very much free. "You came here," Marcus said, his hand now resting on his gun's grip, "to my house. You know where I live. I didn't mean to crash. I was just ... I was driving by. I wanted to see where you lived, see what kind of man Emma's father was." Her voice broke on his daughter's name. "I lost control of the car. There was a dog in the road, and I swerved, and don't..." The word came out like a gunshot. "Don't you dare say her name." Sarah flinched as if he'd struck her. "I think about her every day. Every single day for 3 years. I've thought about what I did to your little girl." "My little girl?" Marcus's voice was deadly quiet now, the kind of calm that came before. "Storm's my 8-year-old daughter who was walking to school when you plowed into her with your BMW, while you were texting your boyfriend about weekend plans." "I know. I remember everything about that day. Do you remember how long it took the paramedics to find all the pieces of her backpack? Do you remember the color of her blood on your bumper?" Sarah's face crumpled, tears mixing with the blood on her cheeks. "I remember all of it. The sound of the impact, the way your wife screamed when she saw what had happened, the way you looked at me during the trial like you wanted to kill me with your bare hands." Marcus realized he was breathing hard, his chest rising and falling like he'd been running sprints. The rational part of his mind, the cop part, was screaming at him to step back, to call this in, to follow protocol. But the father part, the part that had been slowly bleeding out for 3 years, wanted nothing more than to close the distance between them and finish what her car had started. "Why are you really here, Sarah?" She wiped her nose with the back of her hand, leaving a pink smear across her skin. "Because I'm dying." The words hung in the air between them like smoke. Marcus felt his anger stumble, momentarily derailed by the quiet certainty in her voice. "Cancer," she continued. "Pancreatic. Stage 4. The doctors say I have maybe 2 months. So you thought you'd come here and would apologize? Ask for forgiveness? Make peace with your conscience before you check out?" "No." Sarah's voice was steadier now, her green eyes meeting his directly. "I came here to confess." Marcus felt the world tilt slightly off its axis. "Confess to what? You already confessed? You pled guilty. You went to prison." "I pled guilty to vehicular manslaughter," Sarah said. "But that's not what happened." The sound of sirens in the distance made them both freeze. Someone must have heard the crash and called it in. Marcus realized he had maybe 3 minutes before his backyard was swarming with patrol officers, paramedics, and crime scene techs. 3 minutes to find out what Sarah Whitmore was really talking about. "What do you mean that's not what happened?" Sarah looked toward the gap in the fence where her car sat steaming in the wreckage. "I wasn't texting that morning, Marcus. I wasn't distracted. I saw Emma walking on the sidewalk, and I aimed for her." The words hit Marcus like a physical assault. His vision went gray around the edges, and for a moment he thought he might collapse. "What did you just say?" "I killed your daughter on purpose. It wasn't an accident. It was murder." The sirens were getting louder now, maybe 2 blocks away. Marcus could hear the rumble of heavy engines, fire trucks, probably an ambulance. In less than 60 seconds, his backyard would be flooded with first responders, and his private moment of reckoning would become a public spectacle. But all he could do was stare at the woman who had just destroyed everything he thought he knew about the worst day of his life. The word came out as a whisper. Sarah's bloody face was serene now, almost peaceful, as if confessing to premeditated murder had lifted some terrible weight from her shoulders. "Because someone paid me to do it." The first patrol car skidded to a stop in front of Marcus's house, its red and blue lights painting the night in urgent colors. Car doors slammed. Voices shouted. Heavy footsteps pounded across his front lawn. Drew his weapon, not sure if he was pointing it at Sarah, or at the approaching chaos, or at the universe itself for delivering this impossible moment to his doorstep. "Who?" he demanded. "Who paid you to kill my daughter?" Sarah smiled, then a sad, broken expression that somehow made her look beautiful despite the blood and terror. "Your partner," she said. "Detective Ray Morrison paid me $50,000 to murder Emma Chen." The backyard gate exploded open, and 3 uniformed officers burst through with their weapons drawn, shouting commands that sounded like they were coming from underwater. But Marcus couldn't hear them over the sound of his own heartbeat thundering in his ears. His partner, his friend, for 12 years. The man who had held him while he cried at Emma's funeral. The man who had worked the case, who had been the first responding officer, who had cuffed Sarah Whitmore and read her rights while Marcus knelt in his daughter's blood. Ray Morrison had murdered Emma, and he had no idea that the woman who could prove it had just crashed into Marcus's backyard lick. The interrogation room at the 14th precinct felt smaller than usual, its fluorescent lights casting harsh shadows across Sarah Whitmore's bandaged face. Marcus sat across from her, his hands folded on the metal table, fighting every instinct that screamed at him to leap across the space between them and finish what her confession had started. 2 hours had passed since the uniforms had secured his backyard. 2 hours of watching paramedics stitch up Sarah's forehead while she refused pain medication. 2 hours of explanations to responding officers about how he knew the crash victim, carefully omitting her bombshell revelation about Ray Morrison. 2 hours of Sarah insisting she would only speak to Detective Chen, and only Detective Chen, about the incident. Now they were alone. "The recorder's off," Marcus said, his voice hoarse from the adrenaline crash. "But I need you to understand something before we go any further. If you're lying to me, if this is some sick game or revenge fantasy, we'll destroy you." Sarah touched the butterfly bandages on her forehead, wincing slightly. "I'm not lying. I wish I was." "Then start from the beginning. All of it." She leaned back in the plastic chair, her hospital-issued scrubs making her look smaller somehow, more fragile than the woman who had emerged from his hot tub like some avenging spirit. 3.5 years ago, I was broke. Completely broke. My ex-husband had cleaned out our accounts in the divorce. I'd lost my job at the marketing firm, and I was about to lose my apartment. Marcus said nothing, letting her talk. "Ray Morrison found me at a bar in Riverside, Mickey's Tavern. I was drunk, crying into my whiskey, and he bought me another drink. Said he'd seen me around the courthouse during my divorce proceedings, thought I looked like I could use a friend." The mention of Mickey's Tavern made Marcus's stomach clench. It was Ray's favorite after-work spot, a dive bar 3 blocks from the precinct where half the department went to decompress. Ray had tried to drag Marcus there dozens of times over the years, especially after Emma died. "He was charming," Sarah continued. older, distinguished, told me he was a detective, made me feel important, like someone actually gave a damn whether I lived or died. We started meeting there regularly. He'd listen to me complain about my ex, about money, about how unfair life was. And then he offered you $50,000 to kill my daughter. Not right away. Sarah's voice dropped to barely above a whisper. It took months. He was grooming me. I see that now. Learning everything about my situation, my desperation, finding out what it would take to make me cross that line. Marcus felt his jaw clench so hard his teeth ached. What line? You murdered a child, an innocent 8-year-old girl who never hurt anyone in her entire life? I know. Tears began sliding down Sarah's cheeks, but her voice remained steady. He told me Emma wouldn't suffer, that it would be quick, instantaneous. He showed me pictures of her walking route to school, timed it down to the minute. He said if I hit her just right, at just the right speed, it would look like an accident and she wouldn't feel any pain. You believed him. I wanted to believe him. $50,000 would have solved all my problems. New apartment, new car, enough cushion to get back on my feet, and Ray made it sound so clinical, like a surgical procedure, instead of murder. Marcus stood abruptly, his chair scraping against the linoleum floor. He walked to the one-way mirror, staring at his own reflection while he fought to control the rage building in his chest. Why Emma? Why my daughter specifically? The silence stretched so long Marcus thought Sarah might not answer. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely audible. Because you were getting too close. Marcus spun around. Too close to what? The Riverside drug operation. Ray said you'd been asking questions, following leads that could expose everything. He needed you distracted, devastated, off the case permanently. The words hit Marcus like a sledgehammer. The Riverside investigation had been his obsession for months before Emma died, a complex web of drug trafficking that seemed to have tentacles reaching into every corner of the city's underworld. He'd been closing in on something big. He could feel it. But then Emma was killed and everything else became irrelevant. Ray was dirty, Marcus said, the pieces clicking into place with horrible clarity. More than dirty. He was running the whole operation, using his position to protect shipments, eliminate competition, feed information to the dealers. You were about to expose everything, so he needed you neutralized. Marcus felt his legs go weak. He gripped the edge of the table for support. He killed my daughter to protect a drug operation, and it worked. After Emma died, you took bereavement leave. Then when you came back, you transferred to homicide. The Riverside case got passed to another detective who Ray made sure would never find anything meaningful. Which detective I don't know. Ray never told me that part. Marcus began pacing the small room like a caged animal. Everything made sense now. Ray's behavior after Emma's death. His constant presence during the investigation into her killing. His gentle suggestions that Marcus should take time off. Maybe consider a transfer. Even his insistence on being the primary on Sarah's case. Ray worked Sarah's case, Marcus said, more to himself than to her. He was the lead detective on my daughter's murder investigation. Of course he was. He made sure the evidence pointed exactly where he wanted it to point. Vehicular manslaughter instead of premeditated murder. A distracted driver instead of a hired killer. But you confessed. You pled guilty. Sarah's laugh was bitter, hollow. Ray visited me in jail while I was waiting for trial. Told me that if I ever mentioned his name or deviated from the agreed-upon story, he'd make sure I had an accident in prison. Said he had connections inside, people who owed him favors. So you kept quiet. For 3 years. Every day, knowing what I'd really done, knowing why I'd done it. The guilt was eating me alive even before the cancer diagnosis. Marcus stopped pacing and looked at her directly. Despite everything, despite the fact that she had murdered his child, he found himself believing her. The details were too specific, too damning, too perfectly aligned with everything he now realized he'd overlooked or ignored. Why tell me now? Why not take it to internal affairs? Or the FBI? Or because I'm dying? Sarah said simply. And because Ray Morrison is about to kill someone else. The blood in Marcus's veins turned to ice water. What? Yesterday? Before I crashed into your backyard, I went to Mickey's Tavern. Old habits. Ray was there, drunk, celebrating something. He was bragging to some guy I didn't recognize about finally getting approval for the Eastside redevelopment project. Marcus knew about Eastside, a massive urban renewal initiative that would demolish dozens of blocks of low-income housing to make way for luxury condos and retail space. It had been tied up in city council debates for months, with one vocal opponent leading the charge against it, Councilwoman Patricia Valdez. Marcus whispered. Sarah nodded. Ray said she'd been a pain in his ass for too long, asking too many questions about who was funding the project, demanding environmental impact studies that could expose his money laundering operation. He said it was time for another tragic accident one tonight. Ray said something about her jogging route through Riverside Park, how isolated it gets after dark. Marcus glanced at the clock on the wall. 8:47 p.m. Patricia Valdez. was known for her evening runs through the park. It had been mentioned in several newspaper profiles about her healthy lifestyle and dedication to fitness, even in her 60s. I need to call this in, Marcus said, reaching for his phone. To who? Sarah's voice stopped him cold. How do you know Ray isn't monitoring police communications? How do you know he doesn't have other cops working with him? The minute you put this on the radio, he'll know I talked. Marcus realized she was right. If Ray had been dirty for years, if he'd been running a drug operation and orchestrating murders under cover of his badge, he couldn't have been working alone. There had to be other cops involved, other people in the department who would tip him off the moment Marcus made an official report. Then I go alone, Marcus said. To do what? Arrest your partner based on the word of a convicted killer? With what evidence? Ray's covered his tracks for years. You think he's going to confess just because you ask nicely? Marcus felt trapped, like the walls of the interrogation room were closing in around him. Sarah was right, he had no physical evidence, no proof beyond her word. Even if he could save Patricia Valdez tonight, Ray would simply disappear or deny everything, and without concrete evidence, internal affairs would never move against a decorated 20-year veteran. There has to be another way, Marcus said. Sarah leaned forward, her green eyes intense despite her obvious exhaustion. There is. But you're not going to like it. What? Let me help you catch him. Marcus stared at her in disbelief. You want to help me? You murdered my daughter. Because Ray Morrison turned me into a weapon and pointed me at your family. Now I want to turn that weapon back on him. You're dying. You're weak. You're injured. You've been out of prison for 3 days. I'm also the only person alive who can connect Ray to Emma's murder. The only witness to his confession about Councilwoman Valdez. The only one who knows enough about his operation to help you destroy it. Marcus found himself considering it, which made him feel sick. The idea of working with his daughter's killer, of trusting. The abandoned warehouse on the outskirts of Riverside had been scheduled for demolition for 3 years. Another casualty of the city's endless urban renewal projects. Now it served as the perfect meeting place for a corrupt cop and the woman, who could destroy him provided she lived long enough to spring the trap. Marcus crouched behind a stack of rotting shipping pallets, his service weapon drawn, earpiece crackling with static from the wire Sarah wore beneath her jacket. The setup was crude but functional, a transmitter borrowed from an old surveillance kit he kept in his garage. Its range limited but clear enough to capture conversation within 30 feet. Remember, he whispered into his throat mic. Keep him talking, get him to admit what he did to Emma, get him to admit he's planning to kill Valdez. Sarah's voice came back thin and reedy through the earpiece. What if he doesn't take the bait through the grimy warehouse windows? Marcus could see Sarah's silhouette near the main entrance. Her posture deliberately casual despite the fact that she was walking into what could very well be her execution. The plan was simple in theory. Sarah would convince Ray that her crash into Marcus's backyard had been coincidental, that she hadn't revealed anything about Emma's murder, and that she needed his help disappearing before anyone connected her to the Riverside drug operation. In practice, Marcus knew they were betting everything on the narcissism of a man who had spent years believing himself untouchable. Car headlights swept across the warehouse exterior at exactly 10:30 p.m. Ray Morrison's unmarked Crown Vic, the same car Marcus had ridden in 4 countless shifts over the past 12 years. The engine shut off, a door slammed, and footsteps crunched across the gravel lot. Sarah, Ray's voice echoed through the empty space. What the hell happened to you? Through his night vision scope, Marcus watched his former partner approach. Cautiously, one hand resting on his weapon. Even in the dim light, Ray looked exactly the same as always, sultan pepper hair, weathered face, the confident swagger of a man who owned whatever room he entered. Ray, thank God. Sarah's relief sounded genuine, which Marcus supposed it was. I didn't know who else to call. You look like hell. I heard about the accident you crashed into Chen's backyard. Are you out of your goddamn mind? It wasn't intentional. There was a dog in the road. I swerved, lost control. Sarah moved closer to Ray, staying within range of the transmitter. But Ray, I think Chen suspects something. Marcus felt his breath catch. This wasn't part of the script they'd discussed. Suspects what? Ray's voice had gone cold. Dangerous. About us? About what really happened 3 years ago. Sarah's voice dropped to a whisper that barely carried over the wire. When he pulled me out of his hot tub, he kept asking how I knew his name, why I'd come to his house. I played dumb, but I could see it in his eyes. He's starting to piece things together. Ray was quiet for a long moment. Marcus could see him. Through the scope, his head tilted slightly, as if listening for sounds that shouldn't be there. Cop instincts, even in a dirty cop, died hard. What exactly did you tell him? Nothing. I swear to God, Ray. I told him nothing, but if he starts digging, he won't dig. Ray's voice carried an edge of certainty that made Marcus's blood run cold. Chen's been a broken man since Emma died. Transferred to homicide, keeps his head down, doesn't ask inconvenient questions anymore. That was the whole point. But what if Sarah? Ray stepped closer, his hand moving to rest on her shoulder in what might have looked like a comforting gesture to anyone who couldn't see the tension in his posture. You need to calm down. You're talking like someone who's forgotten our arrangement. Marcus adjusted his scope, bringing Ray's face into sharp focus. His former partner's expression was gentle, almost paternal, which somehow made it more terrifying than outright menace. I haven't forgotten anything, Sarah said. But I'm scared. Ray, the cancer's getting worse. And if Chen starts investigating the cancer, Ray's hand tightened on her shoulder. Right. How much time do you have left? The doctors say 6 weeks, maybe 8. And you came to me because… Sarah took a shaky breath. Because I need money. Treatment money. The state insurance doesn't cover experimental therapies, but there's a clinic in Mexico that might be able to help. I need $50,000. Marcus felt a chill of admiration for Sarah's improvisation. She was playing into Ray's expectations, asking for exactly the amount he'd paid her to kill Emma, making it seem like she was trying to shake him down. Ray laughed, a sound devoid of humor. 50,000. The same amount I paid you 3 years ago. That money's gone. Legal fees, prison commissary, medical bills. You spent blood money on legal fees to defend yourself for spilling that blood. Ray's voice carried a note of philosophical amusement. There's something poetic about that. Ray, please, I just need what you need, Ray interrupted, is to remember who you're talking to. I'm not some mark you can run a sob story on. I'm the man who turned you into a killer. Marcus's finger tightened on his trigger. Even through the grainy night vision scope, he could see the change in Ray's body language, the shift from false friendliness to predatory focus. I'm not trying to run anything on you, Sarah said, backing away slightly. I just thought you thought wrong. Ray's weapon cleared its holster in one smooth motion. See, Sarah, the problem with hiring someone to commit murder is that they become a permanent liability. I've been waiting 3 years for you to become a problem I needed to solve. Ray, wait, the accident tonight, crashing into Chen's backyard? That wasn't coincidence. You went there on purpose, didn't you? You were going to confess. Clear your conscience before the cancer kills you. Marcus could hear the fear in Sarah's breathing now, transmitted clearly through the wire. She was improvising, trying to salvage a situation that was spiraling out of control. No, I swear, don't lie to me. Ray's voice echoed off the warehouse walls. I've been watching Chun's house since I heard about the crash. I saw the two of you talking in his backyard. I saw him help you into the ambulance. And then, mysteriously, you disappeared from the hospital. Marcus realized with growing horror that Ray had been surveilling them all evening. Every move they'd made, every plan they'd formed, Ray had been watching from the shadows. You know, what I think happened, Ray continued, his gun now pointed directly at Sarah's chest. I think you told Chen everything. About Emma, about the money, about my operation. I think you're wearing a wire right now, and Chen's somewhere in this warehouse with a gun pointed at my head. The warehouse fell silent except for the sound of Sarah's labored breathing. In the distant hum of traffic on the highway, Marcus felt sweat beating on his forehead despite the cool night air. Ray was too smart, too experienced, too paranoid to fall for their amateur hour setup. Hello, Marcus, Ray called out into the darkness. I know you're here. Why don't you come out so we can discuss this like civilized people? Marcus remained motionless behind the shipping pallets, barely breathing. There was still a chance Ray was bluffing, fishing for confirmation of his suspicions. No. Well, that's disappointing. Ray pressed his gun against Sarah's temple. Here's what's going to happen. You're going to come out with your hands visible, or I'm going to paint these walls with Sarah's brain matter. You've got 10 seconds. Ray, please, Sarah's voice was barely a whisper. 10, 8. Marcus closed his eyes, weighing his options. He could try to take the shot from here, but the angle was wrong, and Sarah was directly in his line of fire. He could try to circle around, but Ray would hear him moving. 7, 6, 5. Or he could trust that Sarah Whitmore, the woman who had murdered his daughter, was tough enough to survive whatever came next. 4, 3. Marcus made his choice. I'm here, Ray. He stood slowly, his weapon raised but not aimed, hands visible in the dim light filtering through the warehouse windows. Ray smiled, an expression of genuine pleasure, as if seeing an old friend at a high school reunion. There he is. The great detective Marcus Chen, still trying to save people who can't be saved. Ray kept his gun pressed against Sarah's head but turned slightly to face Marcus. You know, I really am sorry about Emma. She was a beautiful kid. Sorry enough to murder her. I didn't murder her. I hired someone else to do it. There's a difference. Marcus felt his finger tighten on his trigger. No, there isn't. Of course there is. Murder is personal, emotional, messy. What I did was, business. Emma was collateral damage in a larger operation. She was 8 years old. And you were getting too close to something that would have cost me millions of dollars and put me in federal prison for the rest of my life. So I made a tactical decision. Sarah suddenly spoke, her voice steady, despite the gun at her head. Tell him about Councilwoman Valdez. Ray's smile widened. Oh, that's right. Sarah mentioned she overheard me talking about Patricia. Such a sham, another unfortunate accident waiting to happen. When Marcus demanded, well, that depends on how this conversation ends. If you two walk out of here tonight, Patricia dies tomorrow. If you don't walk out of here, ... Ray shrugged. I might let her live a little longer. Professional courtesy. Marcus felt the trap closing around all of them. Ray held all the cards he had to drop on Sarah. Marcus was outgunned and outmaneuvered, and even if they somehow survived the next few minutes, there was no physical evidence. 6 weeks later, Marcus stood in the rain outside Riverside Memorial Cemetery, watching them lower Sarah Whitmore's casket into the ground. The pancreatic cancer had taken her 3 days after the warehouse shooting, and he was the only more present besides the cemetery workers and a single priest, who had never met her. The media had called it the backyard justice case, a corrupt cop, exposed by the very woman he'd hired to commit murder, brought down in a dramatic confrontation that read like a crime thriller. The story had everything: corruption, revenge, redemption, and a dying woman's quest to atone for her sins. What the media didn't know was that Marcus had spent every day of Sarah's final weeks at her bedside in the prison hospital, listening to her provide testimony that would dismantle Ray Morrison's entire operation. Detective Chen? Marcus turned to see Assistant District Attorney Rebecca Torres approaching through the drizzle, a manila folder clutched against her chest. At 35, Torres had built her career prosecuting police corruption cases, and she'd personally overseen the investigation that followed Ray's death. The grand jury finished reviewing Sarah's testimony. Torres said, "We've got indictments coming down on 7 more officers connected to Ray's operation, 2 lieutenants, 3 sergeants, and 2 detectives from narcotics." Marcus nodded. Sarah's confession had opened floodgates, revealing a network of corruption that reached into every corner of the 14th precinct. What about the drug operation itself? Completely dismantled. We've seized 47 properties, frozen $12 million in assets, and arrested 34 dealers and distributors. The Riverside pipeline is finished. They stood in silence for a moment, watching the cemetery workers finish their grim task. The headstone was simple granite with just her name and dates, no epitaph. No final words, nothing to hint at the complexity of her story. "There's something else," Torres said. "The East Side redevelopment project has been canceled. Turns out, Ray was using it to launder money from the drug operation. Without his protection, the whole thing collapsed." Marcus felt a bitter satisfaction. Patricia Valdez would live, the low-income housing would remain, and Ray's grand scheme had died. With him in that warehouse, any word on the families? Marcus asked. Torres consulted her folder. The Morrison investigation uncovered evidence linking Ray to 6 other suspicious deaths over the past 5 years. Sarah wasn't his only hired killer, she was just the only one who survived long enough to confess. 6 other families. 6 other Marcus Chins who had lost loved ones to Ray Morrison's ambition and greed. Marcus wondered how many of them would find peace in knowing the truth, and how many would be destroyed by it. What about compensation? The city's offering settlements to all the affected families, 7 figures each. It won't bring anyone back, but money never does. Torres closed her folder and looked at Marcus directly. "You know, there are a lot of people who think you're a hero. Taking down Ray Morrison? Exposing the corruption?" "I didn't take down Ray Morrison," Marcus interrupted. "Sarah Whitmore did. I just stood there and watched. You gave her the chance to make it right. She killed my daughter." The words came out flat, emotionless. "Nothing makes that right." Torres studied his face in the gray afternoon light. "Then why are you here? Why come to her funeral?" Marcus had been asking himself the same questions since he'd seen Sarah's obituary in the paper brief paragraph tucked between advertisements. No mention of her crimes or her final act of redemption, just the basic facts. Sarah Elizabeth Whitmore, age 37, died of cancer. No surviving family, because she saved Patricia Valdez's life, Marcus said finally. "And probably a lot of other lives too. Do you forgive her?" The question hung in the air like smoke. Marcus looked at Sarah's grave, then at the small section of the cemetery where Emma was buried, visible through the trees about 100 yards away. "I don't know," he said honestly, "but I understand her." His phone buzzed with a text message. Marcus glanced at the screen and saw a number he didn't recognize. But the message made his blood run cold. "Detective Chen, my name is Amanda Riley. I think we need to talk. Ray Morrison killed my husband 2 years ago, and I have evidence you're going to want to see." Marcus showed the message to Torres, who read it with growing alarm. "I thought we'd found all of Ray's victims," she said. "Apparently not." Another message appeared. "Meet me at Mickey's Tavern tonight at 9 p.m. Come alone. There are things about Ray Morrison that even Sarah Whitmore didn't know." Marcus felt the familiar weight of unfinished business settling on his shoulders. He'd thought the warehouse confrontation had ended the nightmare. But corruption was like cancer, you could cut out the visible tumor, but the invisible cells always found ways to metastasize. "You're not seriously considering meeting with her," Torres said. "A woman reaches out claiming her husband was murdered by a dirty cop, and you think I should ignore it? I think you should let internal affairs handle it. You've been through enough." Marcus pocketed his phone and took one last look at Sarah's grave. The rain was getting heavier, turning the loose earth to mud, but he didn't move toward his car. "You know what Sarah told me the night before she died?" Marcus said. "She said Ray Morrison was just middle management. Someone higher up the food chain was pulling his strings, feeding him information, protecting his operation." Torres frowned. "She never mentioned that in her official testimony. because she didn't have proof, just suspicions based on things Ray had said over the years. But if Amanda Riley has evidence, then you turn it over to the proper authorities and let them investigate. Marcus started walking toward his car, Torres following through the rain. The proper authorities missed Ray Morrison for 20 years. They missed his entire network of corrupt cops. They missed a systematic operation that murdered at least 7 innocent people. That doesn't mean you have to carry this alone. Marcus stopped at his car and turned to face Torres. Emma would be 10 years old now, 4th grade. She wanted to be a veterinarian because she loved animals. She collected stuffed elephants and read at a 7th grade level and made friends with every kid in her class because she couldn't stand to see anyone left out. Marcus, if there's someone else out there ordering the deaths of people's children, then yes, I absolutely have to carry this alone, if that's what it takes. Torres handed him her business card. At least call me before you do anything stupid, and for God's sake, wear a wire. Marcus drove through the rain toward Mickey's Tavern, his mind racing through possibilities. Sarah's final confession had felt like closure, but now he wondered if it had simply been the end of the first act. Ray Morrison was dead, his network dismantled, his victims identified, but someone had created Ray Morrison in the first place. Someone had given him the power to corrupt other officers, to orchestrate murders, to operate with impunity for decades. Someone with enough influence to protect a drug operation worth millions of dollars. Someone who is still out there. As Marcus pulled into the parking lot of Mickey's Tavern, the same bar where Ray had recruited Sarah Whitmore 3 years ago, he realized that Emma's story wasn't over. It might never be over. There would always be another corrupt cop, another desperate person willing to kill for money, another child walking to school down the wrong street at the wrong time. But tonight, in a dive bar that reeked of spilled beer and broken dreams, Marcus Chen would take another step toward something that might eventually resemble justice. He checked his service weapon, activated the wire Torres had insisted he wear, and walked into Mickey's Tavern to meet Amanda Riley and learn what other secrets Ray Morrison had taken to his grave. The bar was crowded with off-duty cops, city workers, and locals drowning their sorrows in cheap whiskey. In the back corner, same booth where Ray had recruited, Sarah sat, a woman in her 40s with auburn hair and intelligent eyes that reminded Marcus uncomfortably of Sarah Whitmore. She raised her hand when she saw him scanning the room, and Marcus felt the familiar chill of walking into something that would change everything he thought he knew about the case. Detective Chen. Amanda Riley stood as he approached, extending her hand. Thank you for coming. Marcus shook her hand and slid into the booth across from her. Tell me about your husband. Amanda opened a briefcase and pulled out a thick folder. David Riley, investigative journalist for the Tribune. He was working on a series about police corruption when his car went off the Riverside Bridge 2 years ago. The accident investigation concluded he'd fallen asleep at the wheel. But you don't believe that. David never fell asleep driving. He was an insomniac, completely paranoid about car accidents because his father had died in one, and he'd been receiving death threats for weeks before he died. Amanda opened the folder and spread photographs across the table. Marcus recognized some of them surveillance photos of Ray Morrison meeting with known drug dealers, financial records showing unexplained deposits into offshore accounts, phone records connecting Ray to various criminal enterprises. Your husband was investigating Ray Morrison. Ray Morrison, and the person Ray Morrison reported to. Amanda pulled out a single photograph and placed it in front of Marcus. The person who's been running police corruption in this city for 50 years. Marcus looked at the photograph and felt the world tilt.